Scary telling.
As the sun set on the last day of the world, I could feel the energy in the air. The city was alive with excitement and anticipation as people of all ages and backgrounds prepared for the end. Some were throwing wild parties, drinking and dancing and reveling in the moment. Others were spending time with loved ones, sharing tender moments and expressing their deepest feelings before it was too late. I was somewhere in between. I had plans to meet up with my lover, a kind-hearted and adventurous soul who had been with me through thick and thin. We had decided to spend the last night together, exploring the city and enjoying whatever pleasures we could find. But first, I needed to make a few preparations. I headed to the grocery store, grabbing a few essentials to tide us over for the night. I picked up some snacks, water, and a couple of bottles of wine, figuring that a little liquid courage might come in handy later on. As I walked back to my apartment, I could see that the streets were already filling up with people. Some were dressed in outrageous costumes, while others were wearing nothing but their birthday suits. The sound of music and laughter echoed through the air, and I felt a thrill of excitement run through me. When I arrived at my apartment, I found my lover waiting for me. They had brought over some candles and blankets, and had set up a cozy little nest in the living room. We embraced each other, feeling a sense of closeness and intimacy that we had never quite experienced before. We spent the first few hours of the night talking, sharing stories and memories from our past. We reminisced about our first date, the ups and downs of our relationship, and the dreams we had for the future. We laughed and cried and held each other close, knowing that our time together was precious and limited. As the night wore on, things began to take a turn. We started to feel a sense of urgency, a need to experience as much as we could before it was too late. We decided to venture out into the city, exploring its nooks and crannies and indulging in whatever pleasures we could find. We joined a group of people dancing in the streets, feeling the beat of the music and the warmth of their bodies. We tried exotic foods from street vendors, savoring the flavors and textures of dishes we had never even heard of before. We even stumbled upon a group of people practicing an ancient ritual, taking part in something that felt both sacred and forbidden. As the night drew to a close, we found ourselves back in my apartment, curled up in each other's arms. We watched as the clock ticked closer and closer to midnight, knowing that our time together was almost up. We whispered sweet nothings to each other, sharing our deepest hopes and fears and dreams. And then, at the stroke of midnight, we heard a loud boom in the distance. We knew that the meteor had hit, that the end of the world had arrived. But for that moment, we didn't care. We were together, in each other's arms, and that was all that mattered. As the sound of the meteor impact echoed through the city, my lover and I knew that our last night together was coming to an end. We held each other tightly, watching as the streets outside began to fill with people running and screaming. We knew that the end was here, but we were still alive, and we wanted to experience as much as we could before it was all over. We decided to venture out into the chaos, to see what was happening and to indulge in whatever pleasures we could find. As we stepped outside, we were immediately greeted by a wave of noise and energy. People were running in every direction, some laughing and singing, others crying and shouting. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol, smoke, and fear. We joined a group of people dancing in the streets, our bodies moving to the beat of the music. It felt surreal, almost as if we were in a dream. We couldn't believe that this was happening, that the end of the world was unfolding right before our eyes. As we danced, we noticed that some people were engaging in more extreme forms of behavior. We saw couples making love in public, their bodies intertwined in a frenzy of passion. We saw groups of people destroying property, smashing windows and looting stores. We even saw people fighting each other, throwing punches and kicking one another in the streets. My lover and I tried to stay away from the violence, but it seemed to be everywhere. We saw people attacking each other with whatever weapons they could find, from broken bottles to kitchen knives. We heard gunshots in the distance, and the sound of explosions and sirens. As the night wore on, we began to realize that we were in serious danger. We saw people getting hurt, and we saw others being killed. We knew that we needed to find a safe place, to wait out the chaos and to try to survive. We made our way to a quiet side street, ducking into an alleyway and hiding behind some trash cans. We could still hear the sounds of the rioting and destruction, but we felt somewhat shielded from it all. We held each other tightly, our hearts beating fast. We knew that we might not survive the night, that this might be the end of the line for us. But we also knew that we had each other, that we had shared something beautiful and meaningful in our final hours. As we waited in the darkness, we heard a strange sound in the distance. It was a high-pitched whine, like a siren, but much louder. We knew that it couldn't be good, that it was probably a sign of even more danger to come. We looked at each other, and we knew that we needed to keep moving, to find a way to survive this night and to face whatever came next. We took each other's hand, and we set out into the chaos once more, ready for whatever the end of the world had in store for us. As the night wore on, the chaos began to subside. We could hear fewer and fewer sounds of violence and destruction. Finally, we emerged from our hiding place and made our way back out into the city. It was a surreal sight. The streets were completely empty, except for the occasional abandoned car or broken window. Debris was scattered everywhere, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and ash. We didn't know where to go, or what to do. We wandered aimlessly through the city, trying to take it all in. We saw signs of life everywhere, from the piles of rubble and broken glass to the occasional flicker of light in a window. As we walked, we encountered other survivors. Some were wandering aimlessly, like us. Others had found a place to hunker down, hoarding supplies and waiting for rescue. We eventually found ourselves near the waterfront, where we could see the extent of the damage caused by the meteor. It was an enormous crater, stretching as far as the eye could see. We could see debris scattered across the ocean, and we could smell the salt water mixed with the scent of destruction. We were both overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. We knew that life as we knew it was over, that we would need to find a way to rebuild from the ground up. As we wandered through the wreckage, we began to notice that there were still pockets of life and activity. We saw people working together to clear debris and salvage what they could. We saw makeshift campsites set up, with people sharing food and supplies. We knew that we needed to find a place to stay, to regroup and figure out our next steps. We eventually came across a small group of survivors who had set up camp in an abandoned building. They welcomed us with open arms, offering us food and shelter. As we settled into the camp, we began to talk about what had happened and what we should do next. We knew that we couldn't stay in the city forever, that we needed to find a way to survive and rebuild. Over the next few days, we worked together to gather supplies and make plans. We explored the city, looking for other survivors and assessing the damage. We tried to find ways to stay safe and to protect ourselves from the dangers that still lurked in the aftermath of the meteor impact. As time went on, we began to realize that we might never be able to return to the way things were before. But we also realized that we had an opportunity to build something new, something that could be even better than what we had lost. We knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but we were determined to make the most of it. We were survivors, and we would do whatever it took to rebuild a world from the ashes of the old one. As we settled into our new life in the aftermath of the meteor impact, we began to realize that there were new dangers lurking around every corner. With no government or social order left to keep them in check, some survivors began to act out in violent or destructive ways. We saw groups of people who had banded together, forming their own tribes and enacting their own rules. Some were benevolent, working together to pool resources and protect each other. But others were brutal and cruel, engaging in violent acts against anyone who crossed their path. My lover and I knew that we needed to be careful, to avoid these groups and to stay on our guard at all times. We had learned some survival skills from our time in the city, but we knew that we had a lot more to learn. One day, as we were exploring the outskirts of the city, we heard a loud noise in the distance. It sounded like a group of people, shouting and screaming. We knew that we needed to investigate, to see what was going on and to offer help if we could. As we got closer, we saw a group of survivors who had set up camp in an abandoned factory. They were arguing loudly, their voices filled with anger and frustration. We approached them cautiously, trying to assess the situation without getting too close. One of the survivors saw us and called out. "Who goes there?" they shouted. "Are you with us or against us?" My lover and I tried to explain that we were just passing through, that we weren't looking for trouble. But the survivors didn't seem to believe us. They drew their weapons and started to approach us, their eyes filled with suspicion and fear. We knew that we needed to act fast. We drew our own weapons and prepared for a fight. But then, a woman stepped forward from the group. She had a kind face and a gentle voice. "Wait," she said. "Let's hear them out. We can't just assume that everyone is our enemy." She spoke to us, asking us questions about our background and our intentions. We told her our story, explaining how we had survived the meteor impact and were just trying to make our way in this new world. She seemed to believe us, and she offered us a place to stay in their camp. Over the next few days, we got to know the other survivors better. We learned about their skills and their backgrounds, and we shared our own stories and knowledge. But even as we worked together to build a new community, we knew that there were still dangers lurking in the shadows. We saw other groups of survivors who were less friendly, who engaged in violence and theft without a second thought. We knew that we needed to be vigilant, to protect ourselves and our community from these threats. But we also knew that we couldn't just withdraw into ourselves, that we needed to work together with other survivors to build something new and strong. As time went on, we realized that our group was growing and that we were becoming a force to be reckoned with in this new world. We had learned to live without rules, to survive on our own wits and skills. But we had also learned that the only way to truly thrive in this new world was to work together, to build a community that could stand the test of time. As our community grew, we began to realize that we had a responsibility to help other survivors rebuild their lives as well. We knew that we couldn't do it alone, that we needed to work together with others to create a new world out of the ashes of the old one. We started to reach out to other groups of survivors, offering our help and expertise. We share our resources, and we work together to rebuild homes, farms, and other infrastructure. It wasn't easy, and there were many challenges along the way. We had to deal with illness, injury, and the occasional violent encounter. But we were determined to keep moving forward, to build something that would last for generations to come. As we worked, we started to realize that we were creating something new and beautiful. We were building a community that was based on trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. We had created a world where everyone had a voice, and where everyone's needs were taken into account. It was a stark contrast to the world that had existed before the meteor impact. There, we had been ruled by governments and corporations, by money and power. But now, we had created something that was based on the simple principle of helping each other survive and thrive. Over time, we started to see other survivors joining us, attracted by the sense of purpose and community that we had created. We started to build homes, schools, and hospitals, and we began to develop our own system of laws and governance. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We were rebuilding a new world from the ashes of the old one, and we were doing it together. As the years went by, we saw our community grow and prosper. We saw children born and raised, and we saw them grow up to become leaders in their own right. We saw new innovations and discoveries as people worked together to solve the problems that had once seemed insurmountable. And as we looked back on the night of the meteor impact, we realized that it had been a turning point for humanity. It had forced us to confront the fragility of our existence and to realize that we were all in this together. In the end, we had learned that the only way to survive in this new world was to work together, to build something new and beautiful out of the ashes of the old.